My name is Helena Crawford. I was 29 when I learned that silence, not shouting, is what finally teaches people who you are. It happened on a Sunday in October, at a restaurant with white tablecloths and low, polite conversation, the kind of place my mother chose because it made her feel like the family still belonged to something. My son Eli, 7 years old, sat beside me, rocking gently, tapping 2 fingers against his water glass in the small rhythmic way that settled him when the world got loud. I had learned, over years of trial and quiet failure, to read his body like weather. The tapping meant a storm was building. I reached over, laid my hand flat on the table near his, not touching, just present. That was our signal. I see you. We're okay. My sister Vanessa saw it differently. She always had. Can you make him stop that? She said, not a question, loud enough for the table beside us to glance over. It's like sitting next to a leaking faucet. I felt the old tightening in my chest, the one I'd carried since childhood, the one that came from being the sister who apologized for existing too specifically. I asked her, quietly, to lower her voice. She didn't. She leaned back, arms crossed, and said the thing that would end that afternoon and, in a way none of us understood yet, begin everything after it. Some kids just need discipline, Helena, not a diagnosis to hide behind. The table went silent in that specific way rooms go silent when something true and ugly has been said aloud. My mother stared at her napkin. My father cleared his throat and reached for the bread basket like it might rescue him. Eli's hand found mine under the table, his fingers cold, his breathing shallow and fast. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend him with facts or diagnoses or statistics about neurology, though I had all of them memorized, worn smooth from years of use. I simply stood, gathered his jacket, and said the only sentence that felt true. We're leaving. Vanessa laughed, short and disbelieving. The laugh of someone who has never once had to leave a room to protect a child. Dramatic as always. I didn't answer. I helped Eli into his coat, my hands steadier than I felt, and we walked out past the tables of strangers who had watched the whole thing with the particular discomfort of people grateful it wasn't their family. In the car, Eli exhaled for what felt like the first time in an hour. I sat behind the wheel for a long moment before starting the engine, watching my own hands, wondering when protecting my son from my own sister had become a skill I needed. I didn't know yet that Vanessa would call it something else entirely. I didn't know she'd call anyone at all. 3 days passed in the ordinary rhythm of our life. School drop-off, occupational therapy on Tuesdays, Eli's careful architecture of Lego cities on the living room floor, each piece placed with a precision that still, after 7 years, took my breath away. I didn't call Vanessa.
She didn't call me.
Our mother sent one text. She didn't mean it that way, which I read twice and did not answer, because I had spent a lifetime translating my sister's cruelty into something more forgivable, and I was tired. The knock came on a Thursday evening while Eli was building. A woman in a gray coat stood on my porch with a laminated badge and a clipboard, introducing herself with the practiced gentleness of someone trained to deliver unwelcome news softly. Child Protective Services. An anonymous report had been filed, allegations of neglect, of a child left unsupervised in public, of a parent unable to manage his behavior. I remember the specific, physical sensation of the floor tilting slightly beneath me, though I did not move. I let her in. I answered every question with a calm I did not feel, my voice measured, my hands folded in my lap, so they would not shake. Eli, sensing the tension the way he always did, retreated to his room and began stacking books by color, a habit that soothed him. The caseworker watched him through the doorway for a long moment. He seems settled, she said, almost to herself. He is, I said, when people let him be. She asked about his diagnosis, his therapies, his school records, his pediatrician. I answered everything, thorough and unhurried, though something in me had gone very quiet and very still, the way water goes still right before it's about to move. When she finally stood to leave, she paused at the door. I have to follow up on every report, she said. But between us, this doesn't look like what was described. After she left, I sat on the floor beside Eli's bookshelf, not saying anything, letting him arrange the last of his books around me like I was simply another object in his ordered world. I thought about the word anonymous. I thought about who, 3 days after a restaurant argument, would know enough details about our life to make a report sound credible. I thought about my sister's voice saying discipline, not a diagnosis to hide behind, and I understood, with a clarity that felt almost peaceful, exactly what I was going to do next. Not out of anger. Out of something steadier than that. I didn't confront Vanessa that week. I did something quieter. I began writing things down, not as evidence for a courtroom, but because I needed, for my own sake, to see the shape of a pattern I had spent years refusing to name. I sat at my kitchen table after Eli was asleep and opened an old journal, and I let myself remember. I remembered being 11 and Vanessa 13 and our mother saying gently, "Let your sister have this one. She needs it more," about a school award I had actually earned. I remembered Vanessa's wedding, 6 years ago, and the toast I gave that she later told me was too long, too much about you, though I had not once said the word I. I remembered, further back than I wanted to, the particular chill of being the daughter who was easy, the one who required no adjustment, no accommodation, no special conversation with a teacher, and how that ease had quietly become the family's excuse to give Vanessa more, always more, because she was, in our mother's words, complicated. I understood, sitting there in the lamplight, something I had never let myself say plainly. Vanessa had spent her whole life being the daughter who needed managing, and somewhere along the way, my son's needs had become, in her mind, competition. Eli's diagnosis brought a kind of attention and accommodation she had always silently demanded for herself and never fully received. His difference made room in the family in ways she couldn't control. And so she had tried, without perhaps even admitting it to herself, to prove that his needs were smaller than hers, a performance, a discipline problem, something a stern enough voice could fix. It didn't excuse what she'd done. Understanding never does. But it changed the shape of my anger into something else, a kind of grief for the sister I might have had, if either of us had ever been allowed to simply be seen without being measured against the other. I closed the journal near midnight. Down the hall, I could hear Eli's white noise machine humming, steady as a heartbeat. I thought about calling Vanessa and screaming everything I now understood. I thought about it for a long time. Instead, I opened my laptop and requested, formally, the details of the CPS complaint against me. It took 11 days for the paperwork to arrive, an official letter confirming the case had been closed, unsubstantiated, alongside a redacted summary of the original complaint. Most identifying details were removed, but one line remained, quoted almost verbatim from the report itself, and I recognized my sister's voice in it instantly, the way you recognize a person's footstep before you see their face. The child is allowed to behave however he wants in public, with no discipline or structure whatsoever. It was, nearly word for word, what she'd said at the restaurant. I sat with the letter for a long time. Eli was at school. The house was quiet except for the tick of the hallway clock, a sound I usually didn't notice, but which felt suddenly enormous. I thought about the caseworker in the gray coat, standing in my living room, watching my son stack books by color, saying this doesn't look like what was described. I thought about the 3 days of silence between the restaurant and that knock on my door, and how very few people had known enough specifics to make a report sound credible. I did not confront her by phone. I did not send an accusing text that could be screenshotted and reframed, twisted into the story of the sister who overreacts, the sister who makes everything dramatic. I had spent 30 years being cast in that role, and I understood, finally, that the way out of it wasn't defense. It was simply the truth, held quietly, and placed where it could be seen. I made a photocopy of the letter. I wrote no note. I mailed it to my mother. Then I did something harder. I called my mother and told her, calmly, without raising my voice once, exactly what had happened. The restaurant, the knock on the door, the caseworker's visit, the redacted line that was not really redacted at all in the parts that mattered. I told her I wasn't asking her to punish anyone. I was asking her to finally see clearly. There was a long silence on the line. And then my mother, in a voice I had not heard her use in years, said, "Send me everything." Thanksgiving came 5 weeks later, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I almost didn't go. I went anyway, because Eli loved my mother's kitchen, the specific smell of her cinnamon rolls, the ritual of setting the table with her, counting forks together in his careful, satisfied way. I would not let my sister take that from him, too. Vanessa was already there when we arrived, seated at the far end of the table, and something in her posture told me she knew. My mother had not confronted her directly. That wasn't her way. Not after a lifetime of smoothing things over. But she had, apparently, asked Vanessa one quiet, devastating question the week before. "Did you call them, Vanessa?" Vanessa didn't look at me when we walked in. She looked at Eli. Dinner was strange in the way dinners are strange, when everyone at the table knows something no one is saying aloud. My father made small talk about football. My mother served food with unusual attentiveness, refilling glasses before they were empty, as if motion could stand in for words. Eli, oblivious to the tension in the way that was sometimes his gift, narrated his mashed potato architecture in a running whisper only I could fully translate, and I found myself grateful, fiercely, for a mind that didn't carry the weight the rest of us were carrying. It was Vanessa who finally broke first, near the end of the meal. When the conversation lulled, she set down her fork. "I shouldn't have called them," she said, to the table generally, not quite to me. Her voice was tight, defensive even in apology. I was upset. "I thought," she stopped. "You thought what?" I said. Not sharp. Just steady. "I thought someone needed to say something," she said. "Everyone always tiptoes around him. Around you. Like you're the only one who's ever had it hard." And there it was, the whole shape of it, finally spoken instead of buried. Not really about Eli at all. Never really about Eli. I didn't raise my voice. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, the way I hadn't in years, and I said, "I know you've had it hard too, Vanessa. I've never once said you hadn't. But you tried to take my son away from me because you were angry that I stopped apologizing for having a hard life of my own. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a choice." No one spoke. My mother's eyes were wet. Eli, sensing the shift in the room, reached over and placed his hand flat on the table near mine, the same gesture I had given him at the restaurant weeks before. Asterisk, "I see you. We're okay." Asterisk. I almost broke, right there, at the strange and perfect symmetry of it. I want to be honest about what happened after that dinner, because the truth is less dramatic than any ending designed to satisfy an audience, and more honest for being so. Nothing was resolved that night. Vanessa didn't apologize again, not properly, not in the specific way that names the harm and sits with it. She left before dessert, citing a headache, and my mother didn't stop her. There was no scene, no shouted confrontation, no moment of cinematic reckoning. Just an empty chair at the end of the table, and a quiet the rest of us learned to sit inside. In the weeks that followed, Vanessa didn't call. I didn't either. I thought, at first, that this was failure. That real resolution required reconciliation, required forgiveness performed and witnessed. I had grown up believing that a family that didn't resolve its conflicts loudly and completely was a family still broken. But I began to understand something different, sitting with Eli on ordinary evenings, watching him sort his books by color with the same unhurried focus he brought to everything, untouched by any need to perform peace he didn't feel. Some ruptures don't close. Some people show you, plainly, who they are, and the healthiest response isn't a bridge rebuilt too quickly to hold weight. It's simply distance, held without cruelty, without a campaign to make everyone choose sides. I stopped needing Vanessa to understand. I stopped needing the family to litigate whose hurt mattered more. I found, instead, a strange and steady peace in simply protecting the small, particular kingdom of my son's life, his books, his rhythms, his fierce and careful joy, without needing anyone else's permission to call it enough. My mother began calling more, tentative at first, then easier. She asked questions about Eli's therapies she'd never asked before, small ones, awkward ones, but real. She started remembering that loud restaurants were hard for him and suggested quieter places without being asked. It wasn't restitution. It was something smaller and more honest. A woman, late in her life, learning to see a grandson she had spent years overlooking in favor of keeping peace with his aunt. There was a night, in early winter, when I sat down to write Vanessa a letter. I don't know what made me start. Maybe it was watching Eli fall asleep with a library book still open on his chest, his breathing slow and even, safe in a way he hadn't been safe in that restaurant months before. Maybe it was simply the particular loneliness of an unresolved sibling wound, the kind that aches on ordinary Tuesdays for no clear reason. I wrote for a long time. I told her about the 11-year-old me, who gave up an award because our mother asked me to. I told her about the wedding toast, about the years of making myself smaller, so she could feel larger, about how I understood, now, that she had likely spent her whole childhood believing that love was a finite resource, and I had somehow taken her share of it. I told her that Eli's diagnosis was not a weapon I had used against her, was not a performance of hardship designed to win a competition neither of us had asked to be in. I told her I forgave her and meant it, and that forgiveness did not mean I would let her near my son again until I saw a change I could actually trust, not just hear promised. I read it over twice. Then I folded it and placed it in a drawer, unsent.
Some truths are for saying.
Some are for understanding privately, so you can walk more lightly afterward, so you're not carrying a stranger's rage against your own sister every time you set the table. I didn't send the letter because I realized, somewhere in the writing of it, that I no longer needed her to read it in order for it to be true. The peace I'd been looking for wasn't hers to give me. I'd already built it, quietly, in 100 small evenings of choosing my son over my own old habit of shrinking. Spring came the way it always does, unannounced, arriving somewhere between one gray week and the next. Eli turned 8. We had a small party, 4 kids from his class who understood him, my parents, no shouting, no restaurants, no rooms too loud for his particular architecture of comfort. He blew out his candles twice because the first time didn't feel complete to him, and nobody rushed him. That, more than anything, felt like the ending I had been waiting for without knowing it. Vanessa sent a card. No visit, no phone call, just a card with a short, careful sentence. Asterisk thinking of you both. I'm working on some things. Asterisk, I don't know yet what that means, long term. I've stopped needing to know on any particular timeline. Some doors you leave unlocked without opening them, so the person on the other side has somewhere to go if they ever choose to walk through it honestly. I think often about the moment I stood up from that restaurant table, gathered my son's jacket, and said the only sentence that felt true. We're leaving. I didn't know then that it would cost me a caseworker's visit, a redacted letter, a family dinner with an empty chair at the end of it. I only knew that Eli's dignity was not a thing I would trade for anyone's comfort, including my own. I was 29 when I learned that protecting someone you love sometimes looks like walking away quietly instead of staying to argue. I am 30 now. Eli is building a city out of blocks on the living room floor, narrating its streets in a soft and private language only I have learned to hear, and I am sitting nearby, not fixing anything, not managing anything, simply present, the way I always meant to be. The house is quiet. Outside, the light is turning gold the way it does in early evening, and somewhere in that ordinary gold light, I understand that this exact unremarkable moment was the justice I had been looking for all along. Not a punishment delivered. Just a life, finally, undisturbed.